just heading out. I call Stuart Nash.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Good call.
I rise to take a first reading call in support of the Taxation, International Investment and Remedial Matter Bill 2010. But before I do, Mr Speaker, I'd like to challenge the Minister who brought this bill to the House to show me the clauses that talk about payroll giving, that talk about associated persons, that talk about insurance companies, all these sort of matters that he brought to the House in his first speech. I wouldn't mind knowing where the clauses are. But I know what, you all know what, everyone in this House knows that there are no such clauses because the Minister gave the wrong speech. But we all know that Jonathan won't have written that speech. This isn't Jonathan's area. Jonathan was the Minister in the House at the time and he was told, here is the speech on the bill you've got to introduce. Someone on that side of the House is trying to stitch up Jonathan Coleman. Jonathan, I would watch my back. One of your colleagues over there stitch you up, mate, and it might have been Amy Adams. She wants your place. She wants your place. It could have been Craig Frost, but someone gave you the wrong speech, and you may. Someone gave that minister the wrong speech. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Someone gave that minister, the wrong speech, and he spoke for 10 minutes about a bill that was passed 12 months ago. 12 months ago. And he didn't notice. But in all due respect to Jonathan, it's not his portfolio area. It's not his portfolio area. I don't expect Jonathan to know this, but someone did know. Someone handed that minister the wrong speech, and they're sitting up there going, look what we've done to Jonathan Coleman. I wonder what one of the colleagues it was that gave that minister the wrong speech. I know you'll get to the bottom of that, Jonathan. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are 2 points I would like to make. The first is that Labor supports any tax legislation that reforms and streamlines our tax system, that promotes equity and closes off tax avoidance opportunities. Labor has always supported such legislation. The second point, Mr. Speaker, is that we will support this bill through to committee stage. However, at the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, Labor members will scrutinise this bill very closely. And the reason we will do that is because the National Government's track record on recent tax bills has been very poor in terms of promoting fairness and equity. As mentioned, Mr. Speaker, Labor supports any reforms that streamline our tax system, that close off tax avoidance opportunities and builds on fiscal equity. This bill on the surface does appear to do this. It builds on recent changes to the tax treatment of international investments. This was a bill that was passed about 12 months ago, Mr. Coleman, that are contained in a substantial tax bill that was considered. Specifically, it changes the rules relating to foreign investment income by aligning it with the current method for calculating attributed controlled company income. The bill means that New Zealanders holding stakes of 10% or more in offshore companies will not be subject to New Zealand tax on the interest unless the companies earn passive income such as interest, royalties and rents. The bill replaces the current exemption for non-portfolio foreign investment funds in the 8 grey list countries with an exemption of non-portfolio foreign investment funds that are resident and subject to tax in Australia. The bill makes changes to the thin capitalisation rules. And just for clarification, a company is said to be thinly capitalised when its capital is made up of a much greater proportion of debt than equity, i.e. its gearing or leverage is considered high. Now, I understand what has been happening is that overseas companies have been gearing up to high levels in New Zealand and then claiming back deductions against interest payments. On paper, as an individual entity, the company may look a little shaky. However, on a global basis, the company's in no trouble at all, and whilst I wouldn't go so far as to say this is a tax rort, it is certainly a way that multinational companies minimise their global liabilities. The bill provides for delayed abolition of branch equivalent tax accounts for companies and the abolition of conduit tax relief accounts. It also makes some remedial amendments to changes already made to controlled foreign company rules, as mentioned in that big bill that the Honourable Jonathan Coleman talked about tonight and we passed last year. As mentioned, Mr Speaker, Labor does support legislation that improves the integrity of the country's tax system, as well as closes down loopholes through which people are able to freely jump and avoid paying their fair share. My second point, Mr Speaker, is that we in the Labor Party will support this bill through to committee stage. However, at the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, we will scrutinise this bill very closely because the National Party's track record, the National Government's track record on recent tax bills has been very poor in terms of promoting fairness and equity. And I would like to outline a couple of examples highlighting what I mean around this. The first example of a government tax bill that pulled the wool over New Zealanders' eyes is the bill that increased GST. John Key stood in front of New Zealanders, looked them in the eye and said, National will not increase GST.
He didn't, did he?
And he did. National increased GST when he told New Zealanders he wouldn't. That government raised GST when that government's leader said he would not do that. And that is simply wrong. And it is an example of a tax bill put forward by the national government that is not good for the people of New Zealand. And to tell New Zealanders that items were only going to go up by 2.2% was always going to be wrong. Even government-owned lotto tickets have increased by around 10%. Another piece of tax legislation, Mr Speaker, put up by this government that was completely wrong in terms of promoting fairness and equity was the revision to the personal income rates. Mr Speaker, I don't think there is any doubt that as a country we are in the middle of a recession. No matter what the figures show, one only has to talk to businessmen and women, the retailers and the workers around the country to understand that the economy is suffering. So what did the national government do? It did what no other OECD country has done. It provided tax cuts to the most advantaged at the expense of the majority. The few
Prime Minister
did very well at the expense of the great majority. Mr Speaker, someone earning $1 million, and there are about 650 people in this country who earn over $1 million, someone earning $1 million have just received a tax cut of $1,000 a week extra in the hand. $1,000 a week, Mr Speaker. And someone on the medium wage in Napier gets about $5 a week. $1,000 versus $5. Now, is that fair? It simply is not fair. Now, Mr Speaker, this tax bill in the budget 2010 cost about $14 billion. And the National Minister of Finance, the Head of Treasury and the Governor of the Reserve Bank have all said that these tax cuts are not stimulatory. Now, what that means is the national government has just spent $14 billion in the middle of a recession on a package that will not create economic growth at all. And in fact, it will have no impact whatsoever on economic growth. That is why this government is the only government in the world that has done this. The Minister said it will not stimulate the economy, and yet he spent $14 billion. And we all know that the last 3 months, tax revenues have been down by $1 billion. I say to the National Minister of Finance, what was he thinking? I say to Treasury, where the hell did they get their forecasting from? Mr Speaker, in conclusion, Labor will support any tax legislation that reforms and streamlines our tax system, that promotes equity and closes off tax avoidance opportunities. However, Mr Speaker, we will scrutinise this bill very closely because the national government's track record on recent tax bills has been very poor in terms of promoting fairness and equity. Thank you.
I call Dr. Russell Norman.